continuation of the Stafford University's Christmas lectures, me and Jamie would sit here and do an introduction to our next host. But our next host actually is Jamie. I know, a bit of a
It's me.
shock horror. It is you.
What am I talking about, Ben?
You're going to talk about all the men you've dated in video games. Yeah,
yes, in video games.
I'm very interested actually to see where you take this. I would sit here and do a long-winded introduction on how awesome you are, but I feel like you could do that better justice than what I could. So without further ado, we will get started with Jamie and the history of men you have, or is it people you have dated in video games. So Jamie, please take us away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk entitled Brief History of All the Men I've Dated in Video Games and the Mechanics Involved. To get us started, a quick introduction on who I am. My name's Jamie Nicholas. I am one of the games dev lecturers here at Stafford University. And I am currently studying a PhD, and my PhD is on the intersection of the concept of queerness as well as video game mechanics. So where those two collide. I'm fascinated by this. Games are a really new, relatively new medium. We have our own way of doing things. We have mechanics. It doesn't exist in any other mediums like books or film. It's very rare for any other medium to have any kind of audience involvement, which is where I come in. Because I'm fascinated by the effect that audience involvement has on narratives, but I'm equally fascinated by the effect that those narratives have on the audience themselves. I'm especially interested in how the concept of queerness, that includes things like sexuality and gender ideas, get translated through video game mechanics. And that is what this talk is on today. There we go. So this talk is entitled A Brief History of All the Men I've Dated in Video Games. The reason it's entitled that is because I talk about game narratives as having a big effect on the player. And I wanted to exemplify that with a really good example of that, which is how queerness in games has had an effect on myself. So I properly started playing games in about 2011. For context, in 2011, I was 11, up until now, which is 2023. So I'm going to get a good spread of lots of different, encounters I've had in video games, how I've interacted with those narratives. I'm going to talk about the gameplay side of that, and I'm going to hopefully bring it all together with a really good point at the end, which you can take away as a game developer and, make decisions with as you are designing things. I will also preface this with this is a lot of this is opinion based on my own opinions. Again, it's a history of me. Therefore, my opinion's going to fly in there every now and then. Don't take it as gospel, but take it as an example of someone who has lived with video games and, in my opinion, has been shaped by video games. So we're going to jump straight in with the first man that I've dated in video games. And a quick warning. This presentation will contain adult content and discussions of adult content, so be aware. I'm not going to shy away from talking about, adult themes because it's kind of relevant to queerness in general and the mechanics involved. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the first person that I dated in a video game, which is Lydia from Skyrim. Now, the keen-eyed people among you may realize that Lydia is not a man, and you would be correct. I need to explain a little bit here as to how this happened. Now, if you don't know who Lydia is a character in the game Skyrim. Skyrim is a game that came out in 2011, so this is the first one we're starting with. And Lydia is I believe she is the housecarl of Whiterun. And she is one of the first companions that you can meet in the game. Let's jump into the next slide. And how did I end up marrying or dating Lydia, so to speak? The sort of She is in fact sworn to carry your burdens, yes. The sort of breadth of dated varies quite a lot here. In this case, I ended up marrying Lydia. And the way you marry Lydia in Skyrim is kind of strange. There's 3 steps to it. I've broken down most of the romances into this 3-step kind of system. So step 1 is you go to a guy called Maramel in Riften, and you can get an Amulet of Mara. Now, an Amulet of Mara is a really interesting item. It gives you plus 10% restoration. There's lovely healing spells, which is a really good buff. However, when you are wearing it, in the lore of Skyrim, if you are wearing an Amulet of Mara, that implies to the people of Skyrim that you are looking for someone to marry. So if you are wearing this necklace and you speak to certain NPCs, those NPCs will turn around and go, "Oh, you're looking for a spouse. I can see that because you are wearing that necklace. I am also looking for a spouse." And this is where step 2 comes in. And this is the completing the marriage requirements bit. In Skyrim, if you want to marry one of these characters, 1, you get the Amulet of Mara, and 2, you interact with them. And that character will usually set out sort of some parameters for actually marrying them. Some of them are very, very simple. Some of them you just have to complete 1 quest. Quite a few of them you will complete anyway, and suddenly you find yourself eligible to marry someone. Good for you. And then the 3rd step, once you've completed this, completing the marriage requirements bit, is you go to Riften, which is a location in Skyrim. You go there and you get married. Simple as. You get a wife or a husband. You can take them to your house. They will provide you with food and money and some lovely buffs for having, a partner. In this example, Lydia's marriage requirement is literally that you own a certain house. If you own that house, she will marry you. What I want to talk about here is the concept of abstraction. Now, abstraction is something that we use in games in which we will break down something into its basic parts. When we do things in games, we often don't include everything from that real world concept that we are trying to recreate. So, for example, in this, when it comes to marriage, we've broken it down into some very basic steps, okay? So you don't have to do any kind of long-term wooing, as it were, to get yourself a partner. All you have to do is wear a certain necklace and do a certain thing, and it happens. Okay, they do kind of explain this in the world. They say something along the lines of like, "Oh, life in Skyrim is very, dangerous. People die all the time, so people tend to skip to the marriage bit instead of doing all this like romantic rigmarole that we would do in real life." But it simplifies it, right? We do the same thing with things like combat. So in combat, you hit a person with weapon, you damage that person, you kill that person. It's a lot more complex in real life. The same with eating food. We get food, we consume food, we apply effects. In Skyrim, that's literally clicking 1 or 2 buttons. In the real world, it involves digestive tracts and cooking the food and lots of other very complex things. Now, how does this mechanic, this abstraction system that we've implemented for marriage, how does that have an effect on a queer person, right? For example, myself. Now, in this example, it makes it very simple, and it also makes it very easy to accidentally do. You can wear amulets of Mara anyway, just after having that conversation, and you could wear one anyway, and you could wander around, and people would just randomly start asking if you wanted to marry them. That doesn't happen in real life, as far as I am aware. It hasn't happened to me. And it's very, very simple. This, combined with one other aspect of Skyrim, in which Skyrim does not have any openly queer characters, means that when 11-year-old me went in to play this game, and I was running around, putting on magical necklaces that give me good buffs and talking to people about marriage, wasn't really interested in that. I wanted to go and kill some dragons. And then I got given a quest to go and marry this person who I hadn't really been listening to, and I ended up married to Lydia. I accidentally married someone. And that's because inside of games, we've abstracted the concept of marriage down to a very simple system that makes it very easy for someone who has no idea what romance is, bearing in mind, again, I was 11, to accidentally end up in quite a serious relationship. What I'm trying to get at here is that Skyrim, back in the day, presents a sort of heteronormative world. So everyone, gamers have no idea what romance is, 11-year-old ones especially. What I'm trying to get at here is that I was presented with romance, but it was a very abstracted concept, very easy concept to grasp, and I was given the steps to complete it, and I just sort of naturally fell into a marriage, okay? Not an amazing representation of how marriage works, especially to a young queer person. It can be quite confusing. And that's the point I want to make about Skyrim. Moving on to the next one in the list, shall we speak? I'm going to start talking about Arcade Gannon. Arcade Gannon is a character from the Fallout New Vegas series. A lot of people, I imagine, were expecting Fallout New Vegas to come up. Fallout New Vegas is an early Fallout game made by Obsidian Studios. It was made very, maybe somewhere between 2006 and 2011. I can't remember exactly. If you're in the chat, please remind me. But inside of Fallout New Vegas, they did this very interesting thing. I'm not going to talk so much about Arcade Gannon because he's rather secondary to the whole concept. I'm going to be talking about the actual skill perk itself. Now, inside of Fallout New Vegas, you can select something called the Confirmed Bachelor perk. Now, Confirmed Bachelor is old-timey slang for someone who is homosexual. It's sort of very much a friend of Dorothy's, or kind of like old-timey sort of slang for a homosexual. And inside of Fallout New Vegas, they've made it into a perk. Now, you can select this perk at level 2, and what this perk will give you the ability to do is it gives you two particular things. It gives you the ability to make flirtatious comments towards other characters of the same gender. And it also gives you a secondary buff in which you do plus 10% damage against other male characters. And I'll get onto that in a second. But once you've got the perk, the game considers you a homosexual, or at least bisexual. You have the ability to then make romantic comments towards men. You're only able to do this if you have selected that perk. Step 2 is to go and find one of these characters. The one I've picked out here is Arcade Gannon. Fallout New Vegas doesn't really have a romance system, so to speak. You can have romantic encounters, you can have romantic conversations, and you can have sort of flirty conversations. And in this case, I'm not even going to read out the quote. You can see it in front of you. I'm not going to read that out with the Stat University banner in the top left corner. But you can use a terrible pickup line, which is given to you by the Confirmed Bachelor perk, and you can flirt with Arcade Gannon. So in this instance, what they've done is they have taken the concept of sexuality and they have made it into a selectable perk, which is, it causes some very strange things. I don't know if we can really, if you consider it from a real life concept, a lot of queer people in real life, especially myself, will tell you that we're pretty sure that we have been the sexuality we have discovered ourselves from birth. It's not something that we picked, or it's not something we just sort of turned on at any one point. It's just something that we are. So it's kind of strange to have it as something that we can select, bearing in mind that the Fallout New Vegas character is considered an adult. It's also strange that it gives us a different ability to do damage against other men. I'm not sure if I cover it. Yes, I do. This relates to queerness in the way that I've just been saying, because it sort of changes things through the idea of like meta ideas. So just by taking this perk, not only does it make you queer, it makes you do more damage towards other male characters. And there's a meta idea here in which if you're trying to play the game the best you possibly can, if you're trying to be the best player possible with the best stats possible, do the most damage possible, really, really, really good at it, you have to take this perk, because a majority of the enemy characters inside of Fallout New Vegas are male. Therefore, it makes logical sense to take that plus 10% damage perk because it's going to make you more effective against the majority of the characters. What this says from a meta perspective is that if you want to be good at Fallout games, you have to pick the gay perk. You have to be gay in the games, which is a little bit problematic. I think that takes away a little bit of choice from players. It also implies, because this perk is only available at level 2, it also implies that you have to have a certain amount of experience points to be queer. That unfortunately implies that the default is heterosexuality, which again is a controversial viewpoint to take. We don't really want to talk about defaults when we're talking about who people are, and also implying that you need to have some kind of combat or vocational experience to be a homosexual also doesn't really work. So we get this strange kind of difficulty with adding in queerness as a perk. Sorry, this is my favorite streamer. How do you donate? You don't. We don't have that button. Would I say this is problematic for representation? Question from Neon Majora. I would say it makes representation a bit more difficult. For example, a lot of the charismatic lines you can say in Fallout New Vegas are flirtatious lines towards women if you're a man anyway. So it does imply that you are still in some way, shape or form heterosexual, even if you take the perk. It's not the best representation I've seen. I'm not here to say what's good, what's bad. I think it's a really interesting use. There's very few places I've seen queerness added as a perk. And it's definitely an interesting take on it. In terms of representation, Fallout New Vegas is a game from the early 2000s, and queer representation in games was not massive back then. We've had a massive surge of queer representation from about 2016 onwards. But before that, queer representation was very much buried. And the fact that it's just openly a perk is quite cool. Whenever I'm talking about representation in games, I always caveat it with, we're dealing with, a massive industry that's, still coming into form, and we're dealing with that massive industry and that medium in a very complex time. So I tend to be quite forgiving when they do strange things like making queerness a perk you can take that makes you do more damage towards men. But yeah, so that's Arcade Gannon. That's how Fallout New Vegas has made queerness into a perk. They've gamified it essentially. But what I want to talk about next is I want to talk about this was sort of my first introduction to blatant queerness in a game. What I want to talk about next is how queerness became marketable and how it became easier to put into games. And I'm going to do this with the BioWare boys, as I lovingly call them. In truth, I could have selected any of the romanceable characters from BioWare, and this point would still stand. I see a few questions in the chat. I'll answer them once I've got into this section. But inside of BioWare, for a bit of context, BioWare is a company. They are known for making big RPG games. They made the Mass Effect series, which is where Kaidan is from, that gentleman with the amazing eyebrows on the left. And it's also where Dorian Parvis is from. He is from Dragon Age Inquisition. He was heralded as one of the more openly and clear queer characters in games of all time. Written by, I've forgotten his name. He's one of my heroes, and I really shouldn't forget his name while I'm live, but I'll get into that later. What I want to point out here is, I could have picked any of these characters, and I'll explain why. These characters are very cut and paste when it comes to their romance lines, when it comes to their romance sort of plot lines. So, for example, Dorian and Kaidan can both fit into this same three-step structure. So, for example, like you start with finding the companion. David Gader. Yes, David Gader wrote Dorian. Thank you for that, Ben. Yeah, so Kaidan and Dorian, you find them, boom, they are now an option for you to romance. They exist in your in your sort of party. They're always going to be around. They're either going to be in your hub world or they're going to be on missions with you. So you're always going to be able to interact with them. Step 2 is BioWare is known for this dialogue wheel system. They use it in most, if not all of their games, as far as I can tell. And it is essentially a very sort of abstracted way of having the player interact with these characters. This is the mechanic in question. So if I wanted to romance Kaidan or if I wanted to romance Dorian, it's the same thing. I just go in dialogue when I'm speaking to them. I find this heart option. I click it. Boom, romance. Done. There's nothing in particular that I need to do specifically in the game to make this happen. And it will just happen as long as you keep on clicking that heart option. Unless you do something absolutely heinous, I can't point at one for these two characters. Other than Kaidan, where the only nuance in romancing him is as long as you don't kill the man twice, he is still a romanceable option at the end of Mass Effect 3. And step 3 is to play out all of the romantic bits. Now, these are important to note because they play very much into the kind of concept that I'm talking about here and the marketability of these plot lines, okay? These romance scenes include anything from having a romantic conversation to having a sexual encounter with these characters. They also involve like having unique dialogue that pops up when you have romanced a character. If you have romanced Dorian, for example, other characters in the party will comment on that. Yes, noted. People don't like it when you kill them. And they won't romance you. Let me move on to the next slide and remind myself what I was saying. This has essentially made a formula for romance, okay? BioWare, and this again, talking from opinion, BioWare has found a way to make romance work. They have found a way to make romance, you know, continuously happen, and it works. And everyone knows what to expect when they're going into a BioWare game because they expect this kind of, you know, dialogue wheel. I can very easily romance a character. This is because in a lot of these games, we are supposed to be playing as the hero. Okay, so for example, in yes, there are characters that will give you very interesting sort of Mordin, for example, which has just been given in the chat, will give you some very interesting responses when you're dating the aliens in Mass Effect. But again, this is the formula that BioWare has created. So that they can market these kind of things, right? So you always know how you're going in. And in these games, you play as the hero, okay? In Mass Effect, you play as Commander Shepard. Commander Shepard is always the hero who is out to save the galaxy. He's always, you know, shooting bad guys and, you know, being swooping in, being the hero. And in the Dragon Age games, you're often the same kind of vein. You are in the game and you will play as the hero. You are the hero of Ferelden. You are the Inquisitor who is out to stop, you know, the big rift in the sky from destroying the world. You are the good guy. And of course, the good guy gets the girl or the boy in the end, right? And that is what BioWare has done here. They have made it as easy as possible for you to romance these characters. And they've made it in such a way that you can, without even thinking, just keep on pressing that heart option and you will be in a relationship with whoever you wish, right? So that's the kind of point I'm trying to make here, is that they have formularized this. And what kind of effect this has on Gwyneth is, I want to point out that this is an idealized version of romance, right? Games, a lot of games, not all games, but a lot of games are made with the intention of giving us the possibility of being the ideal version of ourselves. For example, this is my sorcerer from Baldur's Gate 3. I do not look like that. He's at least 2 inches taller than me. He has fantastic hair and he can cast magic spells. He is an idealized version of myself, right? And that's what a lot of games offer. Thanks, Ben. Any of the comments currently in the chat are Ben Rimmer making fun of me. But these are we're playing to fulfill a fantasy. right? And a lot of these characters and a lot of these queer characters are put in to fulfill that fantasy, right? And that's where you find a lot of sort of tropes popping up that people can, thank you, a lot of tropes popping up that people can relate to. For example, Dorian. Dorian, not only is he an openly sort of flamboyantly queer character, he also has a sort of subplot in which he has been possibly subjected to conversion therapy. Now, that is something that's a very evil thing, and it's something that has been put in the game, either intentionally or unintentionally. I can't speak to David Gaider's writing, but it's been put there, and players can interact with that, and they can react to it. And a lot of the times, you stick up for Dorian, it's like, this is awful, this is terrible. But it's things we can relate to, and it lets us be these idealized alter egos. You know, we get to be the hero who gets the girl, right? It's a big thing when it comes to games. Bearing that in mind, we're going to go on to the next one. And a lot of you will be probably expecting this one because I have not shut up about him for the last 4 months. We're going to be talking about Astarion from Baldur's Gate 3. Now, Astarion sort of changes the way that I started to think about romance. So before all of this, I'd only ever encountered the ones that I've just spoken about, and Astarion is a little bit different. Now, Astarion works similarly in terms of his romance. The systems work similar, mechanics work similarly, in which step one, you meet him, just don't immediately kill him, that's step one. And then step two is to do things that he likes. Baldur's Gate 3, which is the game that Astarion is in, includes an approval-disapproval system, which is a very common system in games that's used to indicate whether or not a character approves or disapproves of your actions. And then step three obviously follows into the whole, romantic bit. Very, very similar to how Mass Effect and Dragon Age have their romances set out. However, I really can't show the kind of stuff that Larian put in because they get quite interesting. And they're very, Astarion is very similar to how the other characters have worked. So, for example, he has levels of abstraction. Here you can go into the menu in Baldur's Gate and you can see the approval rating that Astarion has for you on like a meter. As somebody who's on the spectrum, I would love that in real life, but it does not exist. And you also get these lovely pop-ups in the left-hand corner that say Astarion approves, Astarion disapproves. And that gives us an indication of like whether or not we're doing things that they like. We wouldn't necessarily know that in real life because people don't necessarily tell us. So there is a level of abstraction here. There is also a level of gamification similar to the confirmed bachelor perk. But because Astarion is famously a vampire, Astarion, what you can do is you can let him drink your blood, and if you do that, he gets this really, really good perk, which gives him like a +1 to attack rolls, saving throws, and ability checks, and that will improve your relationship with him. So there is a level of gamification going on here within the romance. There is also a certain level of fantasy, and this is the first dunk on Astarion that I will be doing, and it will not be the last. But for example, Astarion is a very low strength character. In the other games, you'll often find that you are the three games that I've mentioned, Skyrim, Fallout New Vegas, and the 2 BioWare games, you'll often find yourself surrounded by intensely attractive people. Just for some reason, everyone who's out to save the world is apparently also a model of some kind. And Astarion does the same thing. You can even argue that Astarion, for example, the photo I have here of him, he's got very clear and defined abs. If you actually look at his character profile, D&D stats, which is the game that Baldur's Gate is based off, are rated on a scale from 1 to 20. You can go over, but it's mainly scaled on a level of 1 to 20, with 10 being the average. So, for example, there's like strength, dexterity, charisma, wisdom. 10, you would have an average sort of human baseline for all of those things. Astarion has a strength level of 8. He is not a strong character. He is below like strength levels for like an average human being, right? And he is built, right, which is unnecessary. But he is built like that because he is part of the fantasy. He's sort of, you know, a very much sort of like a face value looking at him, a sort of Edward Cullen style, you know, that vampire fantasy that a lot of people have, thanks to, you know, Twilight. Thanks, Twilight. Really appreciate it. But this is where it gets complicated, because the twist is Astarion sucks. He's awful. As a person, his personality is terrible. He's quite an evil and mean character. He's often very manipulative. He's often very antagonistic. For example, in that sort of, if we go back to that sort of chart of like the comparisons to the other characters, in terms of abstraction, Astarion approves of some terrible, terrible things. He will approve when you are deceitful towards people. He will approve when you are cruel towards people. He's not a nice person. I found that when I was playing as my character, I play as a goody two shoes because I like to be the good guy. I like to save the world. And Astarion is not that. Astarion is not the opposite of it, but he is definitely not a good person. And for example, right, that also the gamification kind of side of things, so how it actually works as a mechanic. Engaging in the mechanic where you can let Astarion drink your blood is detrimental to you, right? He gets a lovely +1 perk to a whole bunch of things. You get a -1 perk to a bunch of things, okay? If you want to get if you want to get good approval with Astarion, this may be one of the ways you do it, and it is unhealthy. It is not a good representation of what a relationship should be, in my opinion. And it also, the game flips that idea of fantasy on the head, right? So everyone I've talked about so far, lovely person, usually very, very upstanding human being. Even Lydia will attack you if you start doing bad things. Arcade Ganon will try and shoot you if you do bad things. And Caden and Dorian, while you can't necessarily do bad things in those games, you can, but they won't react in a super negative way. Or if they do, it's minor. In terms of Astarion, all of the characters I've just mentioned work with you as long as you are the good guy. In terms of Astarion, he actively works against you. When you first meet Astarion, as I mentioned, he tries to kill you. If someone tries to kill you, that does not indicate the start of a good relationship, right? After that, he can, if you allow him to join your party, he will also try to drink your blood in your sleep, which is quite a dangerous act. As you can find out, if you continue through that sort of narrative beat, if you fail a dice roll, there's a chance that Astarion will just kill you, right? He will drain your blood and you will die. You can see that on the slides in front of you. I had to sort of censor it because Baldur's Gate is a very graphic game. Astarion's a bad guy. There's not really another way of putting it. Obviously, there's like the concept of redemption, but when you start off, he's a pretty bad person. And yeah, as I said, like all of the people involved in the previous narratives, they're all good people, right? And they will react well to a good person. So yes, moving on to how this actually works with the idea of queerness. Despite being the worst, I actually want to argue that Astarion is the best character to convey a queer narrative. Out of all the ones I've just spoken about, again, this is my opinion, he's one of the best ones to actually portray what I see as a good queer narrative, or just a good narrative in general, right? This becomes from the fact that Astarion is functioning with his own interests, wants, and needs, okay? Every other character that I've talked about, right, works into that fantasy of you are the good guy. You are the Dragonborn out to save the world. You are the courier who is out to fight for New Vegas. You are Commander Shepard who is out to, you know, save the universe. Or you're the Inquisitor. You are out to save the world, right? Every single one of those, right? Those characters that you're introduced to work with you, right? They are also good people out to help the world, okay? Which means, of course, you're going to click, right? Of course, you're going to click together. But Astarion in the world of Baldur's Gate, it's a little bit different because the actual end goal is very open for the whole game, and it's also open for the companion characters, including Astarion. What Astarion originally sets out. That is a good point, and I'll pause to talk about that. While I haven't played the game enough to know the story beats, casting the gay guy as the bloodthirsty psycho doesn't seem off. That is an interesting concept, and that plays into the concept of queer coding, which is when you code evil characters or like antagonistic characters with queer attributes, things like flamboyancy and sort of stereotypical ideas around queerness to sort of point to that character and go, oh, look, they're queer, which must mean like plays into their like evil nature. It's something that's been used often. However, I don't think it applies massively to Astarion. I will keep that in the back of my head and I'll work on that. And at the end of the presentation, I'll explain why. Okay, Astarion functions with his own wants, needs, and interests. This implies a level of autonomy. Okay, so Astarion, like all the other companion characters in the game and yourself, is out to succeed in their own goals. Another example, Karlach, for example, is out to try and fix something that's wrong with her heart so that she can continue living in the mortal realm. Gale of Waterdeep wants to get really good at magic. All of these people have their own intrinsic goals, and Astarion has the same. And Astarion's goals actually come from a very personal place. He was captured by an evil vampire and kept as a vampire spawn for 200 years and forced to do evil things against his will, which is really quite a tragic thing when you think about it, because he's been forced to be this terrible thing. And over those 200 years, nobody was there to save him. Okay, so he was forced to be a terrible person. He had to make peace with that. He had to continue with that. And obviously, when he finally finds his freedom after 200 years of awfulness, not everyone is going to turn into a perfect person who is ready to lay down everything and go and save the world. If you've been captured for 200 years and forced to do awful things, chances are you'll often go off and do your own thing. You've only just got your freedom back. You're not going to be thinking about other people. And that explains part of why Astarion is the way he is. And that it sort of explains a lot of his autonomy as well. He's not been making actions for himself for a long time. It's not been up to him for a long time. So that's a core part of why he does these terrible things. It doesn't exonerate him, but it goes to explain him. And what it does is it also takes something away from the player. Now, in all the previous examples, all of these characters have played into that fantasy of you are the good guy, you are the hero, you're going to save the world. Astarion doesn't, and that means that Astarion can't be part of that perfect fantasy for the player, unless you try really, really hard. This is something that also extends to the presentation of his sexuality. Astarion, in the course of the game, will point out that he has had relationships with both men and both women. The voice actor, Neil Newbon, well done to him for winning a Game Award, confirmed that Astarion is pansexual. And that is shown in the game. And that's quite not a rare thing, but it's quite a poignant thing, because if you look back to the example of Skyrim, in Skyrim, there weren't any sort of openly queer characters or characters that had confirmed relationships with people of the same or similar genders in the narrative. Inside of this, there is. And what that means is, if you go into these games and you are looking to find your perfect heterosexual husband, you're not going to, because Astarion has already determined for himself that he is a queer character and that he has had queer interactions. That's not something we can take away from his character. So there's two things that we can't take away from his character. We can't take away who he is, and we can't take away his sexuality, which leads me into sort of my next point is, this autonomy to be morally grey is what is part of what makes Astarion a strong queer character. By having his own like morals and goals, he becomes separate from the idea that he is there to gratify the player. He's no longer a game object just there to be at the player's whims, that he is a complex entire being that you have to interact with in its entirety. You can't just have, you know, the sort of stereotypical sexy muscular vampire. He has story and narrative and things that he's had to deal with. I've made this lovely chart to sort of exemplify what I have been seeing from a lot of game characters. Because again, games in the media, it's there to make the player feel good, right? It's there to give the player endorphins and let them live out these fantasies. In terms of actually making a queer storyline, I think a lot of games that use these perfect goody two-shoes characters aren't amazing for it, because that involves, you know, taking away a lot of nuance and being like, yeah, very easy today, off you go, enjoy. But when they've built Astarion, they've built him as a character first. They've built him having a life, and they've built him having traumatic events, and they've built a character that has evolved from those traumatic events. And they've also included, you know, obviously queer events to solidify the fact that he is a queer character. So while, and ironically, and part of the point of this is I go into games playing that goody two-shoes character. I go in going, I'm going to play the best character I possibly can. You know, I'm going to be really, really nice. I'm struggling to jump back into Baldur's Gate 3 now to play a Dark Urge run because I know that I'm going to have to do bad things. It's going to make me really uncomfortable. Which means in the end, when I was playing through my original Baldur's Gate playthrough, I saw the very attractive vampire man on the box art, and I went, yes, that will do. What a guy. And then when I met him and I understood his personality, it made it out that I ended up not dating him, because I couldn't get to grips with the fact that his flaws didn't align with my idealized version of myself. But that kind of effect translates over to whenever we have something like a queer relationship as well, because as I said, if you went into this thinking, oh, I'm like in a sort of, from a heterosexual standpoint, I want to make like Astarion me husband, and I want him to be like, you know, only interested in like women, as like a lot of the fantasies will play out. You can't get that because he is a confirmed queer character. The point I've tried to make with this presentation is that they've made Astarion as a character first, and I think having him as a character first has given me, in my whole journey of, you know, experiencing romance in video games, it's given me one of the more realistic approaches to like romance and real world romance, because a lot of the time, and this occurs in relationships, you will see someone as the idealized version of themselves and not as their whole self. And a lot of people would have gone into, including myself, gone into Baldur's Gate 3 idolizing this concept of Astarion being this perfect character, whereas actually I hadn't considered his flaws and I hadn't considered the nuance to his character. And the fact that I didn't end up romancing or going down that romance path with Astarion very much sort of exemplifies what games can show in terms of narrative, because I think that narrative where it didn't work out for me in the end is actually a very much more realistic representation of how romance really works, because you're not going to always find idealized people who you can just wear a necklace and marry. You're not going to find people who are always out to save the world and save other people. That's not how romance works. It's a lot more complicated, and a lot of the times, and more often than not, you're going to find people you don't click with. And I think that is why Astarion is one of the best examples of a queer character I've seen in games, because he does not play to that sort of fantasy. Cool. that is the end of the presentation. I will invite Ben back to read out some questions for me if he's okay with that. The chat has been going off, which I do really appreciate. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. Ben, you're going to pop it there.
Yeah,
Ben.
yeah, I was just waiting for you to give me an opening.
Does anyone have any questions? There was actually a question earlier on the concept of queer coding. So
yeah, let me go find that for you and pop that up for you. This one here.
Yeah, so queer coding is a very common thing, and someone earlier asked if I had played, if I played Cyberpunk 2077. I want to talk about the queer coding. Remember, thank you, Pix. I don't remember to breathe when I'm doing these presentations. I want to talk about Cyberpunk 2077 in relation to the question on screen, because there's a lot of queer coding used inside of Cyberpunk 2077. There's a key example. There's a character who is a Ripper Doc, who is sort of like a sort of cyberpunk surgeon, and they are very queer coded. They're a man who wears very feminine clothes. They've got long sort of nails. They've got long hair, and they act in a very sort of what we would consider sort of creepy camp way. And that character is sort of thrown in there to be a villain, right? And they use those sort of queer aspects to make him into a villain without explicitly saying that he is a queer character. There's not actually any kind of queer interaction with that character. He never explicitly says. It's just sort of an aspect added to that character to sort of, in a sort of outrageous kind of way. The difference between him and the guy who, I believe his name is Fingers. Yes, Caustic. Thank you, Caustic Foil. The difference between that guy and Astarion is that Astarion's sexuality is not something that is put there to play for jokes. Astarion does have, again, he's got those confirmed queer relationships, which means he exists as a queer character. Queer coding is typically when you add queer aspects onto a character who is not actually queer to villainize them. So we're not actually queer coding Astarion. He's more sort of, he is just a gay character who also happens to be evil, which in my opinion is fine.
Yes, Fingers is he's the guy that does all the surgery with the dolls. Yeah. Here we go. And what do you think is the best way to have queer relationships and characters in the games that we make? And that's a deep question.
Very tough question. I think there's a lot that you can pick out of this. So in this example, I've turned around and said Astarion is a good example because he's not put there to like gratify the player. What I would argue is it's fine to give a little bit of gratuity to the player. They're there to enjoy a video game, right? So if you want to have, in the same way that like Stardew Valley does it, where they just sort of have characters you can romance and you bring them stuff, that's fine. It's just when I'm talking about this, I often talk about like the queer narrative and the actual gameplay separately. The gameplay of Astarion is very similar to the rest of them. So it's very abstracted. You click a few buttons, you flirt with him. I think there's even like a little heart icon next to a few of the voice lines that lets you know if you click this one, you're going to flirt with Astarion. Lost my train of thought. What was I talking? It's because I started talking about Astarion again.
What do you think that is the best way to have queer relationships and characters in the games that we make?
Okay. It's very subjective to the game you're making. Baldur's Gate does it very well. They establish the characters with relationships previously, so they're not just blank slates for the player to sit there. One thing, and that's a big thing as well, and this is one of the main points I'll make when talking about designing queer worlds, is that queerness, if you want to have queer romance in your games, if you want to have romance in your games, you should have examples of lots of different kinds of relationships. So in Baldur's Gate, you see a lot of heterosexual couples, you see a lot of homosexual couples, you even see some polyamorous couples as well. So you get that big sort of variety. of different things that the player can pick up on and go, oh, I could do this, oh, I could do that. The issue with Skyrim previously was that Skyrim only had examples of heterosexual couples. So when I went into it, I was under the impression that you'd only end up in a heterosexual relationship. So your world building would be one of the main things I would say to think about when you want to put relationships into games. And if you want to have solid queer relationships, solidify queerness in your world first.
The reason why Caustic mentions Cyberpunk is because it does it the best. He feels, they feel. You notice character sexualities and you pay more attention. And in their first playthrough, they were focused and they got surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I think sexuality, and again, I'm talking from personal experience here. I think sexuality is something that's okay to notice. We talked about queer coding a bit. Astarion does he does do things like saying like, "Oh, darling," and he's got sort of a very like camp sort of attitude to him, and that's fine, right? I know plenty of queer people, including myself, who have that kind of aspect to their personality. I also know a number of heterosexual people who have that kind of aspect to their personality. So I think building a character with a consideration of sexuality is a really good idea. I'm not sure about the example of Cyberpunk, because Cyberpunk kind of swings like on a pendulum from some really good stuff to some awful things, in my opinion. Again, so yeah, I suppose that's what I can say on that one. And it's that same thing again. Like I wouldn't shy away from having very openly queer characters because it's fine. It's like if you want to write characters, you can write that as an aspect of their character without it being offensive. And one thing I'll say is if you are developing games and you're not totally aware of like an aspect that you want to write about or an aspect that you want to include, go and find those people. Go and speak to those people. Broaden your horizons on what a queer person is, for example, because my version of queerness, my version of liking men may be very different to a lot of other different queer people. It's that simple. Broaden your horizons, speak to people, and consider what you're putting in, and make sure you are understanding the kind of things you're interacting with. Queerness, for example, has some very upsetting things that have occurred. So, for example, I mentioned earlier things like conversion therapy. When you're working with things that have adversely affected the queer community, you need to have a very good understanding of what that actually, did to queer people. It can't just be thrown in there. This is a big trend in 2010 onwards. Whenever they would have a queer character on TV, it would always include two different storylines. It was either a conversion therapy storyline or a coming out storyline. Now, those two aspects, while they may be a big part of like queerness as a whole, for a lot of people, they can be quite damaging. They could be quite traumatic events. So you have to be very delicate with like how you approach these subjects.
I think a lot of these rules also apply for writing narrative in general as well. Like if you're trying to set a tone or there's something you're trying to tell, you need to be exposed to those experiences. If you're doing a like a narrative that's about war, you should go read some novels or go watch some films. You need to widen your net and your horizon of knowledge because you only know so much. So if you're gonna have people that are that are queer, that are transgender, that that pansexual or have faced these different challenges, don't try and make it up. Go talk to them and see what their experiences are actually like, because you can write something which is more meaningful and something that has more like groundedness to it, and it'll feel more authentic and it'll feel more real. So it's always important that when just creating in general is go get that reference, go speak to those people, and don't shortchange their experiences, and don't
Ben is right. And if anyone
make it worse.
at uni wants to come and talk to me about micro experience, I'm more than happy to. I do charge 1 coffee per backstory.
Drive's a hard bargain.
I think we need to wrap up now for the next talk, don't we, Ben?
We do.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I do really appreciate it. And thank you for keeping the chat lively. I will see you in classes.
Yeah. Next up, we have
the next talk.
we have Jennifer Chandler talking about, and I just need to go remind myself. I'm sorry, Jennifer, you're gonna yell at me now.
She is in the chat.
Yes, it's very related. It's about NPCs. No, I did not forget.
It's called Love Possibility, Dissecting the Tension Between NPC Autonomy and Player Agency.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. It was a long title and I couldn't remember all of them. But for those that enjoyed Jamie's talk, you'll really enjoy Jennifer's talk. So you should come along. So that starts in 4 minutes. So go grab a coffee, go grab a drink, and we'll see you over there in 4 minutes. And if you have any feedback for us, you can fill out the feedback form here.
I'm doing a happy little dance because I had a lot of fun then. That was I like doing that talk. I will do it more. I think I might be doing it again tonight.
I'm gonna go pop over and get scolded by Jennifer now. I'll see you in a moment. Goodbye, everyone.